Hey guys, how's it going? Today I'm going to show you how to make a hexagon shaped Lazy Susan. Now I'm using a board that was glued up originally for a smaller cutting board, and the plans kind of changed, so I decided to use it for this project. Now this is made out of some scrap pieces of Paduke and white ash, and after it was glued up I had to mill it down using my router plane jig to about the thickness I wanted before heading over to SketchUp to figure up the angles and the sizes I could get out of a hexagon shape on this board. Now, after getting the top of this milled down, which took a little while as two of the pieces were a little larger, I flipped the board over and flattened out the bottom, and then it was time to head inside and jump on SketchUp and figure out the size of the hexagon. So once you have SketchUp opened up, go up here to Camera, and go to Standard Views Top. Now this will give you a top-down perspective on your grid here to work with, and this just makes it easier figuring out the dimensions for a 2D shape. So first thing we're going to do is actually draw out our board. So my board is 10 3/4 inches by 14 inches. So what we're going to do is hit R for rectangle, start here in the corner, and go up. And then you're going to just type in your dimensions. So we're going to do 14 inches long, comma, 10.75 inches wide. Whoops, typo. 10.75 inches wide. Hit enter, and there's our board. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is just a 2D shape at this moment. It's just a line. So what you do is hit P for push. Or actually, it's P for push-pull. You can actually click on this and push it or pull it either way. So we're going to pull it up toward us, and that's going to tell the program that we're adjusting the thickness upwards. And just type in your thickness. This board's about 1.25 inches, so inch 1.25, enter. And this is going to give you your cutting board shape. Now hit spacebar to go back to your cursor. And what I like to do, and what's most beneficial here, is to click outward on the spaces and enclose the board in this box. And this will select the entire board. Hit G to create a component and just create. Now what this does is allows us to draw the polygon shape and the lines on the top of the board here for reference marks and things, so we can get the complete measurement of our polygon, and we know how to lay it out on the board back in the shop. So what we're going to do is go back to Camera, Standard Views, Top. This will let us look down on it again. From here, what I need to do is mark some center points. The reason for these is that drawing the polygon shape, I want the edges of the polygon to line up with the top and bottom of the board. So your board needs to be rectangular when you're doing a hexagon like this or anything like this, because the angles are going to come out. So that means as the angles come out, your width needs to be wider. So if this is a perfect square, you're going to be shorter. You're going to have a width here. The diameter of the polygon will have to be narrower than your entire board. I wanted to use the entire board edge to edge. So I made this out that way, and my scraps just happened to kind of line up to be this size and made it a lot simpler. So what we're going to do is hit L for the line tool and scroll along this line, and as you can see, it clicks into the center here. You see it physically click into the center, and it says midpoint of component. Click there and drag across. It will click the midpoint of the component on the other line and click there. That gives us a horizontal line. Your space tool brings this out so you can move it around without a line, and then hit L again. Same thing for the vertical line. Find your midpoint, go down, find the midpoint on this one, and there's our center point. Now, when I'd done this previously, trying out to make sure I had the dimensions correct, I added a couple more lines here. I found out later those were unnecessary. So what you're going to do from here is you're going to go up and hit Draw, go to Shapes, and then Polygon, and this is going to bring up a hexagon, which is what I wanted in the first place. When you do this, the reason you found your center point is you can start this hexagon from this center point. Now, if you just do this and drag, as you can see, it rotates as you drag it along. So what I have found is the easiest is to start it at the center point and just stay along this line. Now you're going to come to a point right there that that's as large as you're going to get. It's about a quarter inch or so, or somewhere around there from the edge. We'll go ahead and click that. And what this will do is this space from there to there and there to there should be the same if this is correct. So it's showing as 51/64, which is a little crazy, but okay. And same thing there. So what this will do is it will give you your measurement all the way across the top. So this is 13 or a 6 13/64, and all of the lines should be the exact same size. So if you go from there to there, 16 13/64, another line over here from here to here, 13 and 6 13/64. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my words. But this is pretty much the shape you're going to have. So what this is going to do is, I did this just so I could draw it on the top and get measurements. Now, all of this right here will actually be, the corners will be gone. Once you cut this out, this will be the shape of the actual Lazy Susan that you're making. So that's how I come up with the dimensions that I needed. So now it's time to get back out in the shop and get it drawn up on the board and cut out the board to our shape. Once back out in the shop, we need to mark the center of the board. We're going to do this in 3 different places, along each corner and then down the center using a square. Once all your center marks are drawn on the board, figure up the exact half of one side. And now what you're going to do is draw from the center mark to that length off both sides of the center mark. This will give you the exact length you need of one side centered on the top of the board. Make sure to take your time and get this measurement correct, as this will control where you'll be marking all of your marks for the entire shape. After you have the top marks, use a square so you can mark the bottom edge in the same fashion so they are vertically lined up. These will be the marks you use to go off of to mark your angled lines for the outside of the hexagon. With all of your exterior corners marked, set your angle gauge to 120 degrees. Now you'll be marking with the outside of the straight edge. The interior is actually 60 degrees, not 120. Now, when you're lining these up, make sure that you're lining up the very corner of your marking gauge to the top corner of the line you have marked to signify the corner of the hexagon. To mark the next side of the hexagon, just flip over your angle gauge and move it to the opposite marking point. And also make sure that your straight edge is long enough to reach the entire length of the side so you can mark the entire length. With your first 2 sides marked, rotate your angle gauge to where the opposite mark is lined up with the 120 degree mark, and this will allow you to mark the last 2 sides. Now remember, you'll only be marking 4 sides on the board, as the top and bottom edge of the board signify the top and bottom edge of your hexagon. Take your time with all of these markings and measurements, and don't feel afraid to double check or even triple check. And after you get all of your lines marked, I like to mark what is going to be waste, just so I know exactly what side of the line I'll be cutting on while cutting down the board. So one thing to think about is that this angle to the fence of your blade is a 90-degree angle set at 0. So that means we're shooting for a 120-degree angle, and that means from this 90-degree angle obtusely to 30 degrees is 120 degrees. So this should line up perfectly with your lines that you mark on this if everything is perfectly aligned. Once I had the shape completely cut out, I decided I wanted to do a pretty wide chamfer. Now, I usually do these by hand, and I love to do these by hand, but with this shape, I wanted it to be very, very symmetrical, and the best way to do that was using the router table and a chamfer bit. And I really like how this came out and the look of it. It gives these really nice angles all the way around the board. The router table did a great job doing this, and I'll probably do a video later on about upgrading this and showing you more about my little homemade router table. Now that all the chamfers are cut, it's time to start sanding. I started with an 80 grit on the orbital and actually rounded over all the corners on the outside edge of the Lazy Susan, and then worked my way from 80 grit all the way up to 600 grit to give a nice smooth surface. You need to mark the position where you will have pre-drilled holes for mounting your Lazy Susan hardware. You do this by centering the guidelines in the hardware and then marking the drill holes. After doing this, use a center punch to make small indentions in the wood. That way you can see where to drill after you sand off your pencil marks. After sanding off all the pencil marks, pre-drill the holes for the hardware. Just make sure not to go through the other side. If needed, use a piece of tape to mark your depth on the drill bit. As this was a thick board, I didn't do that on this one. But if you are uncomfortable doing this without a gauge, go ahead and use a piece of tape. To finish off the board, I used mineral oil, knowing I was going to also put cutting board conditioner onto the top of the board. This really brought out the grain and the ash and this beautiful red color of the Bidoof. So this worked out really well. Something to keep in mind is adding a little bit of heat while you're doing the conditioner actually gives a nice glossy finish once you buff it out and polish it up, and it looks great. Also, don't be afraid to let your mineral oil seep in and kind of soak for a little while. This will actually give a really beautiful deep color to the wood, and it helps protect it a little better. Also, once you're wiping down the mineral oil, you might have to do this 2 or 3 times, as some of the mineral oil that has soaked into the wood might weep out a little bit. You just wipe it down, wait a few minutes, and do it again before applying your cutting board conditioner. For the final step, it's just to attach the Lazy Susan hardware. To do this, I would suggest using a screwdriver and not a drill, as you could break off the screws in the wood and have a whole mess of problems you don't want. And I'm really happy with how this board came out. This is actually my first Lazy Susan that I've made, and this is the first time I've done a shape such as the Hexagon, and it was a little bit of a learning curve. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and make sure to subscribe. Also, make sure to head over to @JPayneWoodworking on Instagram and give me a follow. And if you want to show your support, there's links in the description for my Patreon and also my Etsy store if you're interested in any of these products. And I really appreciate it, guys, and I'll see you guys on the next one.